Welcome to Struggle to Strength, Amanda.
Hey, Mary Beth, thank you so much for having me.
It's so exciting to have you here. I'm just going to quickly introduce myself before we get started with the interview. I'm Mary Beth Simone. If you don't know me, I am the founder of Niche Partnership Consulting. And my business was born out of a personal struggle. And I've created this format to showcase the struggle to strength conversations that my clients and collaborators are willing to share in hopes that it helps you connect your struggle to strength story. So, before we get started with the interview, Amanda, can you share a little bit about your background and your business?
Yeah, absolutely. I am Amanda Berlin. I am a visibility and messaging consultant for women in leadership roles and in business who need to build their confidence around what they're saying out there in the world, who need to be heard and seen and understood for the unique value that they bring, and who feel like they are sometimes lost in the noise, whether it's in their workplace or in their business. They feel like they are having that fist shaking at the heavens moment that I'm really good at what I do, but I am under recognized. Not enough people know about me, or I am not recognized for the value, the brilliance that I can bring to my work. And I come to this work from a history in the New York City PR agency world, where I was helping the loudest guys in the room be louder than their competition, and ultimately recognizing that my soul was kind of dying in the process because I was working in a culture that really valued that loud voice and often that loud masculine voice. A lot of elevation of male voices. And I recognized that the thing that I learned in that corporate structure, in the corporate PR world, was actually the formula that we can utilize in our businesses and for ourselves when we're seeking to become more known for what we're really good at. And that formula was to take a message or a product, a service, pair it with a spokesperson, which for most of us is ourselves, and make space for that spokesperson to be heard out there in front of the right people. And so that's what I help my clients do. I help them develop their messaging, their language, what they're going to be saying out there in the world, help them develop their confidence as a spokesperson for themselves or their brand, and then find ways to create space for the conversations that need to be had, whether it's creating strategic partnerships, creating space for them to host an event, bring people together, or to find places to be seen in the media.
That's awesome. That's a great description of what you do. And so I worked with you, Amanda, when I was starting out as an entrepreneur. When I moved from corporate, I retired from corporate and started my own business.
Yes.
And my first meeting with Amanda was, I don't know how to succinctly describe what I do. And you just read it off. And people say to me to this day, I need a crisp introduction like you have. And I'm like, well, you should talk to Amanda Berlin.
Oh my
That's how I
gosh,
got
that's
that.
amazing.
So we met in 2019, August of 2019 in New York City before we
Yes.
ever worked together through a lunch hosted by Carol Cox.
Yes.
Yeah, and that is how I met you and was introduced to the work that you do. And so today we're going to focus our conversation on how you experience the strength of connection through the struggle of isolation. So
Yes.
can you take us back to your earliest childhood memory or experience of experiencing isolation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my earliest childhood experience of experiencing isolation or of experience isolation was just based on my birth order. So I am the oldest of three, and I actually heard I don't know, a theory from, child development experts that birth order sort of resets after 4 years. And so I am the oldest, but my sister is 4.5 years younger than me. And then my brother is 6 years younger than me. So he and my sister are very close in age, but I was essentially an only child for almost 5 years. And my sister and brother being so close in age, they were always kind of like this little unit. And people often thought they were twins. So I really was kind of set apart even in those early years. I learned to change a diaper when I was 5 years old because I would help with my sister. And then my mom had a very difficult pregnancy with my brother. So she had like a very small toddler running around, and I was sort of like I was not an adult clearly, but I also wasn't a kid anymore. It was kind of like my indoctrination to adulthood in some ways, which led me to feel really separate from my siblings growing up. I will say that now, as we're all adults, I'm so lucky to have them. And I have such a great relationship with each of them individually. And we have a great relationship, the three of us. But growing up, it was a different story because that age difference, despite it, being just 4.5 and 6 years, it was vast during those early years. And again, I was sort of not really a kid anymore. It was kind of like their mini caretaker in a way.
Yeah, yeah. My mother-in-law would call you a mini mom.
Mini mom. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, so like the helper. Um, yeah, so I just wanna give a shout out if anybody is with us live, please feel free to, add any remarks in the comments or any questions, and we'll keep an eye on that and, check in with you. So that's interesting, and that's such an interesting idea that the birth order resets after 4 years. Such an interesting concept.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. And it really spoke to me because also, actually, interestingly enough, and I think this speaks to the concept of feeling isolated. Um, I, I heard Natalie Portman, of all people, who is an only child, talk about her childhood and say that she has very few memories from her childhood because she has no one to bounce those memories off of. She has no one to recap with or commiserate with or celebrate with in terms of what happened during those years. And I actually really identify with that because I don't really have very many memories from my own early years. I have memories from maybe like 7 on because that's when my sister could start remembering things and we
Yeah.
could compare notes. Or even later than that, I have, 1 or 2 memories from my super early childhood, but not a lot. My earliest memory, I would say, is really even from maybe like 7 or 8 years old. I can remember
Wow.
like details. Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting, and I have 6 siblings, so I would agree that there's a lot of that conversation of, "Do you remember when?" And,
Right.
that keeps and that's an interesting idea to think of how that might embed memories into us having those
Yeah.
conversations.
Yeah.
So fast forwarding into parenthood and entrepreneurship, how
Yeah.
did isolation show up for you there?
Yeah. So I worked for 12 years in the New York City corporate agency world, and in the last 3 years of my corporate career, I was feeling super disenchanted. I felt like a round peg trying to fit in a square hole. I was not a good like my I just had a lot of like it's not fair energy coming up in the terms of the way that the corporation I worked for was structured, and I was ready to leave. And then mercifully, I so during that 3-year period, I really did a lot of my own work to kind of figure out how can I exist in this construct if I'm not really sure what I'm going to do next, I need to figure out a way to be here and not be in this like, I hate it here energy. I needed to be in this productive energy of like, I am going to be proud of the way that I am showing up, even if I'm not comfortable or if I know that I don't want to be here. So I developed a kind of three-pronged approach for myself every time I was to walk into my corporate job. I was determined that I was going to forgive any like bad behavior that or any like perceived infractions that my colleagues or my boss at the time would like I couldn't hold a grudge. I had just had to forgive. I was holding myself captive if I was locked in that resentful energy. So I had to forgive. I had to accept that this was the structure. Like I wasn't going to be able to change anything. I had to just accept. I had to be in acceptance. I had to be a radical yes to everything, even if it didn't really sit right with me. I didn't have to endorse it, but I had to accept it. And then the third piece was I had to be the light. I couldn't show up with that same kind of like resentful, low morale energy that I was receiving. I had to elevate in some way. And I had to, at least to the extent that I could be proud of how I was showing up. And so I, I gradually like, the way I see it, like raised my vibration a little bit in that workplace. And eventually I was let go, which was kind of shocking at the time. But I was like, oh my God, no. But yes, okay. It's like your reaction is like, I don't want to be laid off, but then maybe like you do actually want. So I was let go and I had really no clue what I was going to do, but I knew that I wasn't going to go back and find another job just like the one that I had been pining to leave for several years leading up to this. And so I really worked on figuring out what I was going to do and ultimately realized that that work that I had been doing in the corporate structure, I could do that work in a way that was meaningful to me, which led me to this concept of coaching and consulting with entrepreneurs, small businesses, startups on their publicity strategy, their messaging, and their delivery out there in the world. So I started this business in 2000. I got laid off in 2012. I really kind of got my feet under me in 2013. And that was also the year that I got pregnant with my daughter. And so this is where the story of isolation comes in because I was the breadwinner for our family. I was about to be a new mom. And my relationship was really on the rocks, which was a super challenging trinity of occurrences. So new business, new mom, and like really dealing with this sort of interpersonal struggle in my relationship. And I felt like no one understood what I was going through. And when I realize in retrospect, when you adopt that narrative that no one understands what I am going through, that is a like straight shoot to isolation because you are just assuming that no one understands and for me I shut down. I didn't share what I was going through. I thought that no one could possibly get it. And there were some reinforcements to that narrative. Of course, we always receive like the answer that we're looking for. But I really did everything I could to try to connect and to try to find people that could understand what I was going through. But I would go to like a new mom support group, and we would sit on the mats in the back of this like child's play space and talk about what we're challenged by. And it was all of these moms that were challenged by like, oh, my baby is spitting up too much, or is my baby spitting up too much, or my baby is not spitting up enough, or like my, whatever these. And I was like, my problems are so much bigger than this. But I didn't venture to say like, God, I'm really struggling in my relationship, or this is really hard right now. So, I was separating myself from the support that I might have received if I was willing to be real about what I was going through.
That's interesting. So when you're talking about that, what's coming up in my mind is that I feel like there's so much pressure on new moms to be having a great
Yes.
experience that it could be, I imagine, very hard to find a safe space to say, my relationship is struggling right now. Feel alone in my business, and, whatever you feel,
Mhm.
you know?
Yep. Absolutely. That is 100% true.
Yeah, and I'm not a mom, but I see it. I see the pressure that, is
Mhm.
put on women, to be having a wonderful new mom experience.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and just being an entrepreneur, I mean, going through that process myself, there are so many times just that alone
Yeah.
feels like a very solo pursuit,
Mhm.
especially in the beginning. Not as much once you're into it, but in the beginning when you're developing your network and you're finding your resources, and yeah, that's very,
Absolutely. Yep,
very solo.
absolutely.
So you had these experiences and then enter 2020.
Yes.
And the year started off pretty good. And then by the end of the first quarter, not so much. So, how did
Yeah.
that experience affect you?
Yes. In over the course of the 7 years prior to 2020, my business grew exponentially. And my life was good. I actually did end up getting divorced, which was a blessing for both of us, and we are good friends and supportive partners. And actually, my co-parent was really such a fantastic support during the pandemic. So like we did have this good sort of supportive familial unit. However, I was meant to host an event that was going to be like the linchpin for the rest of the year in my business in March of 2020. March 19th, 2020 was the date of this event. And it was the biggest undertaking, the most well planned event that I had ever hosted, that I would have ever hosted up until then. And I remember I actually had gone to Mexico leading like right in the beginning of March because it was my parents' 70th birthdays, and our family like we sort of like held our breath and like took the trip no matter what. We felt the impending um crisis that was percolating, but we took that trip. And I remember on that trip I was preparing for the event, and on March 12th I had gone to a fitness class in downtown, downtown. And I came out and we realized, like, we got word that school was going to close the following it was like the 16th school was going to close. So this was the 12th, the Monday the 16th school was going to close, and my event, I knew that my event could not happen if there was no school. It was like still very confusing. We didn't know, like, obviously in retrospect your event can't happen in a big public event can't happen if like they're closing the school because of a pandemic, but it just was not clear at all what we were in for. So I knew, like, okay, well, no one's going to have childcare. So anyone who's a parent is not going to be able to come to my event, let alone myself, which, like, I knew that my co-parent would step in if I needed the support. But so it just became clear all of a sudden that event could not happen. And I remember going through the stages of grief right there on the sidewalk. I literally was like, the bargaining, the anger, the despair, the whatever, and then finally the acceptance. Like, okay, whatever is to come, maybe, this was my thought, maybe it will be better than what I could have possibly planned. I did all this planning, and my, based on what I've talked about so far, I think you get the sense that I have, I have a a sense that, like, we're supported in a way, that in unseen ways. And that was my immediate thought, was maybe whatever is to come in my business will be better than what I planned. And with that as my underlying belief, I went on like a sprint for the next probably, 6 months, trying to replicate the impact that that event would have had on my business. And to make a long story short, everything turned out great. I was able to lean into relationships that I had made over the previous 7 years. I was able to get people into my program that would have launched from the event. I was able to secure new clients, and my business grew during the pandemic and following the pandemic. But the trauma of that sort of like line in the sand and lockdown and change everything, and the panic that came with not being able to pursue the plans that I had for my business sent me all the way back to the way that I felt when I was first starting my business, which was, I'm in this alone. I have because like I said, I was the breadwinner at that time as well. Even though I was married, I have no safety net. I have no partner who's going to like fill in the gaps. I have to make this work. And I felt like I was the only one who was experiencing this, even though I knew that this was something that was happening to everyone at this very moment in time. But again, it actually, like, rational thought did not intercede. It really took me back to that original wound of having to like figure it out all on my own. And so that's where that wound of isolation came back, because we were all physically isolated, but even though rationally I knew that everyone was experiencing this, like, I have to figure this out and I have to pivot big time, and I have to how am I going to make money to support myself and my child? That sort of like existential question, everyone was dealing with that, but it like kicked me back to that original feeling that I had when I was the new mom with the new business and the entire weight of responsibility on my shoulders.
Isn't it interesting how accessible that old wound is?
Yes.
Yeah, when something
Yes.
happens.
It
Yeah.
is. It is.
And then, so how did you get through that feeling of isolation? Like, did you have a network around you that you were able to strategize with and come up with some new solutions?
Yeah. So one of the things that I teach in my business is the power of strategic partnerships as a means to being more visible on behalf of your business or behalf of your work. And finding your allies is like public relations 101. This is something that we would do for clients in the big PR world, help them figure out who their strategic partners are and what are you going to do with those strategic partners once you secure them. And so I realized that this was the key to replicating the visibility that I would have gotten from hosting that big event that I was going to host. And so I really leaned into all of the relationships that I had created over the previous 7 years in my business, and was able to capitalize on those relationships and create mutually supportive exchanges that helped each of us move our businesses forward, despite the fact that we were in this extraordinary circumstance. And so, yes, I had professional relationships, a professional network to lean into, and a personal network to lean into as well. Also, including those like my ex who would like roll his eyes when I was like, I feel like I'm the only one that's dealing with it. Like sometimes that reality check, even though it's like not exactly what the reaction that you want, it helps when, it helps bring you back down to earth. So I had tons of support around me. And, the other thing what was the other thing that I wanted to say about that? The strategic partnerships, the personal network, and yeah, that was it.
Okay.
I think so. It'll come back to
Yes.
me.
So when you when you see like feelings of isolation on the horizon, do you have techniques that you use to like say, oh, that's what I'm feeling, and like ways to manage it?
That's a great question. Actually, I will go back. That I did remember the other thing that I was going to say. And this may be an answer to this question as well. One of the things that was and even to this day, as I continue to pivot and evolve my business, um, one of the things that enables me to interrupt the thought that I am alone in this is the fact that I've been doing this now for 10 years and I am not the same person in any way that I was 10 years ago when I started this work or when I started this venture to be out on my own. I have way more resources, way more people in my network, way more knowledge. It's a completely different baseline that I am starting from as I venture to rebound from the pandemic, as I venture to start a new vertical in my business. I have way more momentum and more resources than I had back then. And I was, 10 years is a lot when you are going from 33 to 43. It's like a big decade. And I believe that I absorbed a lot and I learned a lot and I still have more to learn. I will always be a lifelong learner, but I think that there is value in what I've the knowledge I've accumulated over the last 10 years. So that's one way that I interrupt that thought. And it's something that helped me in that moment as well. When I was like, what am I going to do? Is remembering that there's a foundation here. But yeah, I would say that's really one of the primary ways that I've sort of counteracted that narrative. And also to remember that that's what it is. It's a story. It's a narrative. And so we can always choose to believe that story or to recognize that, that story may have elements of real feeling in it, but is it actually true? Is it actually the gospel? Is that
Yeah.
going to be the gospel of my life?
Yeah, that is an excellent point, and I think that that's worthwhile for all of us to remember when we get into that cycle of going back to a place that is a sore spot for us, and to remember
Right.
that we are not the same person as the last time that we experienced that. That's perfect. So I
Yeah.
want to make sure that we talk a little bit about what is on the horizon in your business. So can you share with us what is coming up? Any events that you are hosting, anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am planning on hosting a masterclass in the next couple of months, so everyone can be on the lookout for that. One of the things that I'm really excited about is that up until now, I've worked primarily with entrepreneurs, mostly solo entrepreneurs, mostly women, some small businesses, some small teams, but yes, period. And what is on the horizon for me is working with women leaders to help them develop their messaging for their nonprofit, their startup, their division inside their corporation so that they can be effective spokespeople for their organization. And that is more important than ever because there are more women leaders than ever who need to be heard. And it's about developing messaging. The work is about developing the narrative for your organization that you feel confident delivering. And it's about figuring out how you can best show up as the spokesperson, the powerful spokesperson that your organization needs. And this is not just for someone who's going to appear in the media. This is for someone who will be doing presentations on behalf of their organization, someone who will be out there pitching, or someone who just needs to feel more confident getting up in front of a group of colleagues and talking about the impact that she is having on the team, on the organization, and on the industry at large.
That's wonderful. I love that you're doing that. I can see that that will be very helpful to a lot of people, a lot of women in a lot of different types of businesses.
Thank you.
And you have an event coming up in June. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, still in the planning stages, but it is on the calendar. I still have to figure out what the crux of that content is going to be. But my goal is to offer several master classes throughout this year, kind of referencing that event that we were talking about. I want to sort of break that up and give different opportunities for people to learn and connect throughout the year. And so my next one will be sometime in June.
That's awesome. And so, Amanda, we've talked a little bit about the ways that people can work with you, but can you share with us what the primary way that people start working with you one on one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a couple of different ways that I work with people one on one, and it all starts with a conversation because that enables us to figure out what makes the most sense. And I would say that people start with me in one of two different ways. They are either feeling like they are they know what they are doing in their business, but they don't know how to talk about it effectively. That's, I think, where you and I started.
Yes.
You had a clear concept of what you were doing, and we created the language that enabled you to communicate that to the people who need you. And so that's really where most people start with me. They're pretty clear, and we figure out, okay, how do we create language, create messaging that is going to actually make sense and connect to the people who would be the person that you want to bring in as a client. And so I have structures around or frameworks around creating that kind of messaging. And I have and I always work collaboratively with my clients so that I'm echoing back to you the language that I'm hearing you say, but in a way that I think will connect with the audience you're trying to connect with. And that is a skill that I developed. I didn't realize, there's so many different talents that are talents that any of us could embody out there in the world. And one of the things that I cultivated over the years is figuring out how to put messaging into language that any audience can digest. And that comes from my years working in corporate PR because I would get, this technical information from a pharmaceutical company or a financial firm and have to figure out how am I going to position this so that the people who watch the Fox News channel or the ABC affiliate in Nashville are going to understand what we're talking about, or San Francisco or Cleveland or wherever. So it
Right.
really, we needed to create language that anyone could be able to access. And so that's what I work with my clients on. And I work with them in short-term capacities to kind of like really dig in and figure out their messaging like you and I worked on. And I also work with them in longer term capacities as part of programs that I offer that create community as well as give them chances then to figure out where we're putting that message. And that's the other part of the work. So we figure out the foundation, the messaging, their offers, how they talk about the way that they work with people. And then we figure out where are you putting that message in order to be visible in front of the right people. And so those are the two primary ways people would work with me at a starting point.
Yeah, and just the way that you work with messaging is just pure brilliance. And
Oh, thank
I
you.
think that, it allows us to be able to say specifics and what our differentiating offer is in a very concise and short way so that we're not just word vomiting on people and going on and
Yeah.
on. Yeah,
Yes. Well,
that's
thank you for
wonderful.
that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me today, Amanda, and thank you for sharing your story. I think that it's a story that many people can relate to, and I greatly appreciate you being on Struggle to Strength.
Thank you, Mary Beth, and thank you for creating space for these conversations.
Okay, take care.